folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our expectations series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Broderick Washington and Tez Walker, and we're doing so with Jake Luke. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
I am pronouncing your name correctly?
Yep. You got it.
Good. Jake, appreciate having you on again. And it's always good to have you on, a very voice of reason, as I think of it. When you come on the show, I always appreciate that. Start with Broderick Washington?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. He's entering the year 5 of his career here. Before his 4th year, he actually signed an extension that took him through 2026. This is the first year of that 3-year extension for Washington. Had kind of a down season in 2023.
Yeah, a little bit. And an interesting player, too. I mean, it's funny. One of those guys, a 5th-round pick back in 2020, like you mentioned, gets a weird sort of rookie year that was affected by COVID. Obviously, that was very well publicized with a player like Patrick Queen, who still to this day kind of talks about how that affected his mentality. I think it's something that's underrated with some of those guys, Matabike, another one. But you don't hear much from Broderick Washington, so you don't really hear his mentality on it. Had kind of a weird off-the-field thing a couple of years ago. I don't think it was anything too serious, but, that's another thing that he sort of had to overcome. Then quietly turns into a solid player. He gets that extension, like you said, nothing too eye-popping as far as what he did last year. But overall, an interesting player that I think I'm generally a fan of. So
great draft in 2020, of course, for the Ravens. We think of 2018 when we think of the greatest draft in Ravens history, but 2020 is not too far behind in the great drafts in Ravens history. Patrick Queen is a 1, Dobbins is a 2, Matabike is a 3, Duvernay is a 3, Harrison as a 3. Tyree Phillips, he's gone now, but he was a 3 at that time. Ben Bredesen, traded early in his career, was a 4. Broderick Washington, a 5. James Prochet, a 6. Okay, that didn't really work out. And Geno Stone, a 7. It's hard to take credit for Geno Stone when you cut him. In the first year, you can't really take credit for him anymore as a draft pick, but still, anyway, an outstanding group of players for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, a win for the pro personnel guys. Maybe they're saying, hey, we got to go and get this guy back. But yeah, and it's funny. I mean, you mentioned that it is up there with some of the all-time best drafts in Ravens history. I don't think it was thought of that a couple of years ago. And I think that speaks to maybe a little bit of the fan sort of reactionary attitude that we have, and I'm guilty of it. I'm sure you are at times as well. Looking at these draft classes after 1 or 2 years and trying to just pass a quick judgment on them. I think maybe it's a point in the direction of let's all take a breath, give these guys a couple of years and see what we get.
Right. With Dobbins, certainly a reversal in the wrong direction. Maybe true of Duvernay as well as last year or so. But Matabike, Queen, and Stone all stepped forward and gave the Ravens some very good play. And not only did they still have some players from that group playing for them, of course, they also have a couple compensatory picks they are projected to get in next year's draft that will help as well. And Broderick Washington, one of the guys who's here, mentioned he had a tough year last year. I want to get into a couple statistics. High missed tackle rate, 17.4%. That was up from previous year where he'd been one of the Ravens' best tacklers. A sharp decline in what I consider kind of the strikeout to walk ratio for interior defensive linemen, and that's the ratio of stops to missed tackles. Had 26 and 4 in 2022, which is an excellent rate of 6.5 to 1, down to 9 to 4 in 2023, 2.25 to 1. That's not going to cut it for a lineman. Also went from 6 batted passes to 0. That kind of depressing there. Now he had his career batted passes by year are 0.060. So I'm hoping for more.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, that's like one way to affect the passing game for a guy who doesn't really bring a lot of pass rush juice either. So you definitely would want to see that come back next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't really get to play on a lot of the passing downs this last year. Now, he's not as extreme as Brent Urban in this regard, who plays almost no passing down snaps. He was about 10% of the 3rd and 4th downs. But Broderick Washington was 21% of snaps on 3rd and 4th down, and that was as opposed to 28.5% 3rd and 4th down snaps for the defense as a whole. I think he still pursues well for a defensive tackle as a sideline-to-sideline guy. Now, there's only so much you can do, but I think that he's been a guy who I think of as a high-effort, high-motor interior defensive lineman. That's something you get when you play a few less snaps. That's kind of nice about the Ravens' rotational system.
Yeah, and it's something that I wrote down too is work rate with this guy. And I don't break down tape quite to the extent that you do, but even just watching on Sundays, you can tell that he's a guy who, even if he has sort of athletic limitations that prevent him from, moving laterally and kind of getting involved in certain plays that are on the other side of the field from him, you can tell that the effort is at least there. And I think that's something that the Ravens really like about him, and probably a reason why they decided to sign him to that extension.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time they tried to sign both Madubuike and Washington, who were both coming out of year 3, and they were really had to be getting nervous about 2024, the season we're now getting into, because the only guy signed was Travis Jones, and Broderick Washington was the first of these signings, and then since then, all the other dominoes have fallen into place. We've had, I guess, dominoes don't really fall into place. All the other dominoes have fallen anyway. Madubuike signed long term, Pierce signed long term. Urban signed for another year of presumably the handshake crew, but a valuable complementary player, and so it's really nice. So the 5 guys who took every single defensive snap on the interior defensive line last year will be the 5 guys on the roster. It's one of the smallest questions I'd say on the entire roster is who's going to make the team on the IDL.
Yeah, and an interesting sort of mix of guys where you have sort of a star power with Madubuike. You have one, it feels like budding in Travis Jones a little bit. He hasn't quite popped from a production standpoint yet, but he was a highly thought of 3rd round pick. He's made a couple splash plays in his career thus far. And you got kind of the grinders in there with Washington, who kind of has a similar story to Urban a little bit. Urban obviously left Baltimore for a while, but he was a little bit of a later pick there. I think in the 2014 draft, he got injured early. Yeah, and he just kind of a weird career for him, maybe a little bit of a weird career for Washington as well, but they've both kind of just found nice little rotational spots along that defensive line there in Baltimore. And then obviously Pierce, similar career to those guys as well, where he's the undrafted guy there in 2016, leaves for a couple of years, comes back, and they're just kind of holding it down.
Yeah, so Pierce certainly has gotten paid in his career. Broderick Washington got paid this past year, so he's going to make some money in the NFL, whatnot. The guy who didn't really get paid during his career is Urban, and just an unfortunate circumstance of not being healthy at the right time. He missed a full year early on. That hurt him developmentally, but then he played a huge percentage of the snaps in 2017 and just got hurt at the wrong time and was not ready to be signed there for that next year, which is unfortunate for him. But the Ravens got a second tour out of him, and that's worked out, I think, pretty well for the team. I did want to talk about the Ravens and their 2 interior defensive linemen that they seem to be happy with on passing downs this day, which is kind of a departure from the Martindale Ravens, who did a lot of rush nickel, 3 outside linebackers on the field, some race car, 4 outside linebackers on the field that would flush out everybody pretty much otherwise who could be in there on the defensive line. But now kind of a cornucopia here with 3 guys who can really rush the passer, including Pearson, Travis Jones and Madubuike, are guys they want to keep on the field on 3rd down and rotate through that crew.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it felt a little bit less crazy blitz heavy when they went away from Martindale to McDonald, and maybe a little bit relying more on the talent. Just everyone's going to kind of sit home and just do their job a little bit to pull a Belichick aphorism there. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious to see how that's going to translate over to Zach Orr. I'd expect him to be more McDonald than Wink. I just feel like it seems natural that we're just going to have a carryover from what we saw last year, but I guess we'll see. And these guys are going to be, it's interesting to see how they're going to be deployed.
Yeah, it really is. There are a lot of things I think are going to really stay the same, in part because I think Orr was probably involved in some of the game planning with McDonald this last year, but also because the talent is still what the talent is. And even with the loss of Queen, you're probably starting from the position that the Ravens are going to be a committed nickel team for multiple reasons. One is that they seem to have the guy potentially in Trenton Simpson. We don't really know who he is yet, but if I had to bet, I'd say he's in there. They give him a shot for 3 downs. Zach Orr, of course, came in. His career was as a 3-down linebacker with the Ravens, and he could well be highly biased to that, which I think is okay. I'm not a big fan of committed nickel teams. I think you take away defensive flexibility by not having the option to play dime, but that could still come on. If it doesn't work on for Simpson, it certainly could be something the Ravens turn to.
Yeah, and it seems that Simpson, in my opinion, profiles athletically kind of similar to Queen, where he has a lot of speed, a lot of explosiveness. If all you need him to do is what Queen did early in his career, where it's like, hey, hair's on fire, just run forward, try to make a play. Queen had a lot of success doing that early, but he also got picked on a lot as a younger player in those passing situations. So, if that's all you get out of Simpson this year, I don't consider that entirely a wash. So I guess we're going to have to see what happens.
I want more than that. Officially, I'm going on record. I want more than early Queen out of Trenton Simpson. I think the possibility is there that he could be better as a coverage player, which is really the big thing that held Queen back, aside from block shedding and tackling, some other significant responsibilities of inside linebackers in his early career. I'd like for him to do those things better than Patrick did at the beginning of his career. If he's year 3 Patrick Queen, I'm probably okay with it. If he's year 4 Patrick Queen, I'm great with it. But
yeah, and I think it'll help having Roquan Smith next to him early in his career, which Patrick Queen did not have that luxury. So
absolutely true, absolutely fair. And we'll get back to Broderick Washington here. A lot of 3-5 versatility he has to lean on, which means he's got a role very similar to Urban in terms of what he brings to the field. I think, given that he's a younger player and he's signed for more times, the Ravens would like for Broderick Washington to work out. They could potentially get out of his 2025 contract for basically a wash. If they had a better player who was on his rookie deal, they might do it, but probably they won't. Probably Broderick Washington is here for 2 more years of these 3. And obviously he can't reasonably be cut this year. There's a more dead money dead money amount that would not make sense. But in some ways, Broderick Washington is playing for his 2025 season in 2024.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's how a lot of these deals tend to work out, where you have that kind of final year tacked on, and it's essentially just a team option. So I think you make a good point there. And I guess we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. I don't think there's any real chance he's certainly not going to lose his job to any of the UDFAs. It is possible his playing time will get squeezed by Travis Jones or by somebody else who's active. Maybe even by Urban if he's more effective, or if Washington's effectiveness is at a lower level again. Where would you be in terms of handicapping whether or not he'll see more or less snap count than he did last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without knowing exactly what Orr is going to be trying to do. And obviously, you're never going to know 100% exactly, but I would expect a healthy rotation at best. Like he's not a guy who I think is a priority to have on the field at all the time to begin with. So I think, like you said, there's certainly a possibility that Urban could eat in. I definitely would expect Jones to. So I don't know, like given what you said, it wasn't a super impressive 2023 for him. I think, I don't know if I'd say playing for his job to quote what you were sort of saying there. I don't know that you were saying that he is, but just the idea of it. I don't know if I'm expecting that, but healthy rotation is what I would say.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, let's get right down to it. We always, on this show, we're going with what's a good season and what's a great season. I'll tell you how I do it, but you use whatever definition you want. I take the 60th and 80th percentile of where I think his season might land, and it's already notional with me. So I am kind of sticking my finger up in the wind, admittedly, to do that. But I really try and ask myself, is this going to happen 2 out of 5 times? Is this going to happen 1 out of 5 times when I do this? But talk through it with me. What's a good season from Broderick Washington look like to you?
I mean, just from the eye test perspective, like I just want a little bit more disruptiveness. I want to see a guy who is kind of going forward on the attack a little bit more. It's not just kind of bouncing off and shedding a block and then getting into the run game, which is it's great stuff, but that's just kind of what he already is, right? He's just kind of that grinder to me. I'd say getting forward a little bit more in the pass rushing game, being a little bit more independent. You're not stunting and looping around Travis Jones to get a sack on Justin Herbert. That's how he had one of his 2 last year, just going back and looking. I'd say upping the run stuff numbers. He only had 3 last year from what I saw. Let's maybe tick that up a little bit. More sacks, obviously, that's the big thing, kind of the base level that you would like to have. He only had 2 last season. Like I said, let's up that number to like maybe a 3 or a 4 if we're talking about a good season. And then just pressures. I mean, that's something that's big for defensive linemen. From what I saw, he had 10 last year. Let's maybe bump it up to like 15 or 20. That would be, I guess, good.
I think that'd be outstanding. I'm a little bit more conservative. I set the bar a little lower for him because he's coming off a bad year, obviously. But for me, a good season, just read it to you. It takes a step forward in at least 2 areas in which he was deficient in 23, with a return of more tackles, stops relative to missed tackles, batted passes, and pressures. And I'm not saying anything about sacks in terms of a need for those, certainly not in the good level. It could be the same number it was with more pressure, and I think he could do more for this defense, significantly more if he had more pressure and batted passes. Importantly, I think he needs to play as needed and at approximately the league average level. So I think if you get a guy who is not, you're not worried about how close he is to the replacement level. You've got a league average player. I think that's good. I don't think he was that last year. So being perfectly honest about this, he needs to take a step forward, and he solidifies his position on the 2025 roster. That's what I'd say. By the way, he's not a huge risk to do that. He probably does that at about the 35th or 40th percentile, or maybe in the 25th percentile, that he solidifies his position. But I'm adding it in here because he's at the 60th, and that would certainly do it.
Yeah, certainly, and especially for a $5 million AAV type player, I think you're right on the money.
Okay. All right. How about a great season?
Great season. I mean, I kind of just ticked the numbers up from what I was already talking about. And like I said, individual pass rushing ability, like you make the point that he's just kind of what he is right now, and we're probably not going to see that. And I think it's also especially affected too by the loss of Anthony Weaver. I think that is probably going to play a role here as far as what we see from him. So I'm really not expecting that great season. I don't know if I'm even expecting necessarily the good numbers that I put out there, but like I said, just upping the individual pass rushing ability, a little bit more sack production, let's say like 5 to 6 sacks would be great to me. And then I really didn't, you're so academic with this stuff. I wish I thought a little bit more with the batted passes, because that really is a big part of it. I didn't think of that either. And I think, more batted passes, just being more active, more disruptive, and less reactive, and just, stuffing the stack sheet a little bit more. I think that would be great.
All right. I'll say for a great season, he needs to play 15 plus games. He needs to step up due to circumstance or emergency to 45% plus of snaps. And by the way, in a lot of these cases, what's a great season for Broderick Washington is not a great deal for the Baltimore Ravens. They don't want to lose somebody because whoever they lose is probably going to be better than Broderick Washington to force him to move into a more prominent role where he plays 45% of the snaps. Delivers elements of pass rush at a higher level, be that whatever. Could be tip passes, sacks, pressure leading to second man opportunities, additional hits, whatever it might be. Returns to a solid missed tackle rate and a better ratio of stops to missed tackles. I think that's in there in the good season. It's at a higher level in the great season. I don't think he'll get back to 6.5 to 1 again, but boy, would it be nice if he was. That certainly would be a great season, but probably above the 80th percentile in terms of what I'm thinking. I don't think he's a player that you hope is going to suddenly become a Pro Bowl player. He's in his 5th season now. He's, you said it earlier, ascribed it to me, but basically I think it's probably true that, he is who he is. And you hope that he improves in some small ways relative to where he was last year and gets back to the player he was in year 3.
Yeah, and they've really made a very good living finding these types of guys in the mid to late rounds. And I mean, you're talking about the 5th round out of Texas Tech, a defensive lineman coming from Texas Tech and having this type of career. You really wouldn't have expected that. So overall, it's been pretty good thus far.
Yeah, and they're very good. It's one of the positions they're extremely good at drafting, and they're extremely good at developing. Let's talk about Anthony Weaver for a second, because I think the Ravens will miss him. Certainly outstanding candidate to be a head coach. So I wish he was leaving the Ravens to do so. So wish there was some other, there's a part-way to coordinator role he probably could have had, like assistant defensive coordinator or associate head coach or something else. That might be too high in terms of what they're talking about. But it would have been nice to keep him for another year. That's the challenge of teams that play extremely well, is they tend to be very well coached. And the Baltimore Ravens have certainly been that for really their entire history. And this year, just it's a exercise in cat herding to keep these guys together. Very fortunately, I think they've involved Chuck Smith in some ways that have kept him around for another year. And part of it, I'm sure, is compensation. But from what I've heard, he was very significant in trying to look at pass rushers for the draft.
Yeah, no, it seems like he is very involved, and he's a younger guy. He relates to these guys very well, active on social media. It seems like he's the right type of guy that they needed for the right type of moment where I think they were looking for a little bit more juice in the pass rushing department, as opposed to, like we said with the Wink Martindale, just scheming everything up. It seems like they want more individual contributions, individual development, and he seems like the right guy for that. You mentioned Weaver. I think it's really is a hallmark of a great coaching staff to have great coaches underneath you, not be insecure, not worry about, people usurping you or anything like that. It's just it's the John Harbaugh type thing where he wants his guys to succeed. And, Anthony Weaver, I think he did ultimately hit a ceiling here when he did not get that defensive coordinator job. I think they made the right move going with Orr and kind of that younger untapped potential. But you said it, man. I think Weaver has very good potential to be a good head coach in this league, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens pretty soon.
You make a fantastic point there about Harbaugh's security level. I was at a management training program during my professional days, and they asked me, what's the most important quality in a leader? And a lot of people had different things to say, but mine was intellectual security. Above all else, I want people who can hire people better than themselves and not be concerned about their own jobs. It's so important.
Yeah. Even only my 5 or so years in the corporate world, I've seen the good end of the spectrum. I've seen the medium end. I've seen the very bad end. And I can say with confidence, not knowing too much what goes on inside the castle, I think John Harbaugh is on the good end.
Yeah. All right. Outstanding. Let's move on. Talk about Devontae Walker a little bit. I thought a very exciting pick to get in the 4th round, number 113. He was my number 12 receiver overall. And you get a guy with speed. Now, the Ravens have had guys with speed at this point in the draft and not had it work out. But Tez Walker is a interesting risk profile for that point in the draft.
Yeah, definitely. And you make the point that they have done this type of thing in the past, but this is a different NFL. This is a different college football. This is a different sport than when Tandon Doss, for example, is getting picked in the 4th round. These guys,
Williams, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of guys that they have swung and missed on doing this, but this was the Ozzie Newsome days. This was 10, 15 years ago. I think it's a different game now where guys are growing up 7-on-7s. These kids were probably like in middle school when Odell Beckham made his catch 10 years ago. And they're like, I want to do that. There are so many of these guys coming out here now. And it's almost like I've jokingly, but also kind of correctly, I think, compared it to the housing bubble and the real estate crisis. Like there's just inventory everywhere. There's a bubble with these receivers, and you don't have to go out and swing and, make these massive free agent deals on them, because you can find guys that are ready made to come in and contribute right away. It just feels like there's a real abundance of them. And we've seen it even with the Ravens the last couple of years with DeCosta's tenure. Devin Duvernay, not a great player necessarily, but he was a real contributor. That was the type of guy that if they had picked 10 years earlier, I would have said the Demetrius Williams thing. Here's another guy, that's just going to come in and not do anything for them. And with Tez, just watching him, not a perfect prospect to your point, but he looks like a guy who could carve out a role on an NFL team at some point.
Yeah. I'm actually quite excited about it. A little bit of his information from UNC. I'll give you, first of all, 4.36.40. I think most people are familiar with it. 6'2", 193. That's a great combination. And he was a very fine deep route runner at UNC. He was the guy who beat Wiggins for his longest play of the year, 43 yards, where Wiggins' second longest of the entire season was only 18. So legitimate NFL prospect, had 10.6 yards per target last year. There are a couple of troubling components to it, though. One is that he only had 2.8 yak per reception, which is quite low for an athlete of his size. Just to talk about this very briefly, yak is a function not just of how big and how strong you are. If you're Gus Edwards or Jamal Lewis, you're going to get lots of yards after contact as a runner. It's also about elusiveness, and it's about contact balance and some other things in the open field. But it's about elusiveness oftentimes. So players like players who like Mitchell, for example, do it with a combination of contact balance and elusiveness to force missed tackles. But he only had 2 missed tackles forced in 41 receptions. Which is very disappointing.
Yeah, and with that kind of tall, spindly frame, you would hope that he would find a way to play a little bit lower than that, but he doesn't. When you watch him with the ball in his hands, he does, in my opinion, play a little bit more upright. And I think that plays into what you're talking about. He is kind of, to me, and the Ravens, they have gone on record making this Torrey Smith comparison. I don't think they're exactly the same, but I can definitely see what they're talking about there. It feels like, I don't want to throw out one trick pony or some derogatory term like that, but it does seem like, listen, there's one club in the bag here right now,
Yeah. That is an important thing to not have happen if you're a deep runner in the NFL. You will get put on an island, or if you're incredibly fast, you'll get some additional safety help. But most of the time, you'll get put on an island if all you can do is run. And the problem with him is that there's no complementary route yet to go with the deep routes. His hitches were terrible, average 5.2 yards per target, and he had Drake May throwing the ball to him. Not the perfect quarterback, but certainly way, 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 way above the average college quarterback in terms of the opportunities he was getting. And he only got 5.2 yards per play on a lot of comeback routes. It was about 20. I believe it might have been 20 hitches in the group. So it's a lot. He's got to figure that out. When Derek Mason figured that out with the Ravens, he was unbelievably good. Joe Flacco, and he had the back shoulder timing down. He could also go deep. And when you can beat you two ways, you don't have to have every route in the book that you can run. Just having those two would be an enormous help. And hopefully that's something we see.
Yeah. And another point there as well, I saw Lance Zierlein made a note that when Drake May would kind of freestyle and go into that fire drill mode, he didn't do a great job always working back to the ball, which I think is a concern too. Obviously, Lamar has gotten much better at playing within structure throughout his career, but it is a strength of his to play out of structure as well. We saw plenty of that last year, and it really helped the Ravens out. So that's another thing that he's going to have to really adjust to, because if Drake May was getting out of the pocket a lot, Lamar's probably going to be doing that much, if not more. So
yeah, it's a matter of understanding where you can find space, and Lamar plays by very non-traditional rules in terms of space when he's extending a play. Normally, you have right-handed quarterback rolling right, and we saw this for years with Joe Flacco, who's very limited. Frankly, if he anytime he wanted to roll left, he was doing the other team a favor, whether he's going to run the ball or throw it. It took him so long to get reset to throw the football. It was not going to work. But when Joe Flacco rolled right, which is on a lot of plays, then they had the traditional places where receivers would go to find the football, which really constricts the field down to just that right third, where he might find a receiver at any one of three levels, generally speaking. With Lamar, he has broken the rules tremendously in terms of where he'll throw the ball, left or right. It goes back across the field a fair amount, and the receivers are just responsible for finding space in non-traditional ways. We saw Nelson Aguilar in his first year with the Ravens really do very well with Lamar in terms of finding that space on an extended basis. Even Miles Boykin, when he played here, I thought did a pretty good job with it, particularly in his rookie year. But anyway, in terms of Walker, he's going to need to keep running routes through to the end. He just can't run his route. And I'd say, I've been running for 3.5 seconds. The play's over, right? And start looking around. He needs to figure out, where do I need to be next as he's seeing the play is still going.
And when do I become a blocker too? Because there's a real decision tree there with Jackson. I mean, like you mentioned him rolling to the right, rolling to the left. I mean, that play against San Francisco last year where he's rolling to his left, he's pump faking a little bit, and then he tucks it and runs, and he gets him into field goal range. That's a lot to take in for any wide receiver, let alone a rookie in the 4th round. So it's a lot that he's going to have to take in. I feel like it's something that you can really only learn with experience playing with a guy in an actual game. So it might take him some time.
And that's Walker will get lots of training in terms of when he needs to block, because he's going to have to be a blocker in the run game if he wants to be on the field for the Ravens. But he's got a good frame for it. He's got good length for it, and he should have the good feet for it to maintain, being upright. Players like Boykin were exceptionally good at it here. And it's still have a number of other players who've not been the same size. Willie Snead, not a bad blocker at all, for example, for a guy who was not nearly as big as Walker is. But got to be able to keep his feet and keep a smaller guy, whether that means a safety or a corner, extended and positioned out of the play, as opposed to just trying to hit him once and you've made your block. It's a kind of the Ravens wide receivers, they learn to do it well.
Miles Boykin being a big one there. That's another thing that's very underrated with him. I know it didn't totally pan out, but that was a guy that would play through the whistle every single time, and that was appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be almost a bad joke by the end because the receiving wasn't working out, and you had people who were, they don't see receiver as anything but a yardage total, say, I don't want to hear one more thing about what a great run blocker he was. Well, tough. Yeah, that had a lot of value to those Ravens teams.
That's what the position used to be, a long time ago, granted, but
yeah, it was anyway. One thing that was pretty good for Walker last year, which will be interesting to see how Jackson reacts to when he's on the field and when he's throwing in the deep ball in particular, is he's good on contested catches. 10 out of 17. That's not a big sample size to go on, but it's something that if Lamar throws him the ball deep, he should be worried about overthrowing him, not just worried about overthrowing the defender and making sure that's done. So a lot of times it seems like when Lamar has thrown to Bateman, there's been a much higher percentage of overthrows as opposed to when he throws to OBJ. And I think it has to somehow boil down to trust for those two guys. Because it's not like Bateman is slow and he couldn't overthrow a defender and still throw it in his area. And it wasn't like OBJ is fast anymore. And that was an issue. It's just he had a greater degree of trust the way I saw it in terms of how he would throw the ball up and let him get it. And I hope Walker earns that from him pretty quickly, which means that preseason playing there, even if he's playing with a different quarterback, which he will be, is something that is going to be very important for him. In camp and preseason, just staying healthy, staying away from the soft tissue injuries.
Yeah, and it'll be important for the Ravens too, because not only is Walker the only guy over 6 foot in that wide receiver room currently, but I mean, you talk about guys that can win contested catches. I like this receiver room, I certainly do, but outside of a couple flashes from Rashad Bateman here and there, we really haven't had a wide receiver in that profile where it's go up and get it, out physical a guy. Zay Flowers, he's kind of your jitterbug. He's a little bit of a deep threat himself. Aguilar work in the middle of the field. Like I said, Bateman, he's got that to him, I think, but with some of the injuries that have racked up over the years, the inconsistencies, the bad place that he was in mentally last year, we haven't seen that in a while. So if Walker can really start to develop into that player, I think that'll round out the receiving core nicely. I know they have Andrews and Likely in the mix and they can do all of that, but it will be good to have a guy who has that capability and also the blazing speed and the height that he brings.
Yeah. They do have still hanging around in the background and reportedly had a great year on the practice squad last year. Sean Ryan is 6'3". I don't know if he gets an opportunity or not. I don't know if he's the kind of guy you keep on the practice squad and the Ravens say, yep, there goes, whoever, Aguilar or somebody else, and they bring up Ryan. They actually give him some snaps as a receiver as opposed to just a special teams player. But they do have one other tall guy who's played some decent football for them.
Yeah, it's interesting that final spot on the roster. I'm hearing a lot of Malik Cunningham mythology coming out of Owens Mills right now. So it could be a dogfight between those guys and a couple others.
There's some Malik Cunningham's over 6 feet, isn't he?
Oh, I think he's right around that. Yeah.
All right. I'd have to look it up. Okay. What else do I want to say? I think that's pretty much it. In terms of competing for snaps, maybe, he competes with Bateman and Aguilar, and we know that. He probably profiles as an X receiver. Now, you'd like your X receiver to be able to run more of the routes since he gets the bigger portion of the space budget for the offense. So you'd rather you have a guy who can run a number of routes like Bateman or OBJ could. But if you don't have that and you have a guy who can run, a hitch or a deep route, that's or 3 different deep routes, let's say, that's at least something. How do you see him competing with the rest of the wide receiver group for snaps? And where would you over under his snap percentage this year?
Honestly, I don't know that I could put a number to it because I'm kind of expecting a little bit more of that 12 personnel that a lot of people have been talking about. Mina Kimes been talking about it a little bit. I really think they like what they saw out of Likely last year and that they should. So yeah, without putting a number to it, I think he will. I think they're excited about this pick. I think he's going to get some decent burn. You mentioned him as an X. That can be tough for a rookie. But I mean, even just using him as a decoy, if you want to put him at X and then Flowers at Z or Y and let him go in motion a little bit more, I think that's an exciting proposition. So yeah, I wish I could handicap it a little bit better, but I do think he'll get his opportunities. It's not going to be anything crazy because like I said, I do expect them to be getting Andrews their targets, a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. That's not even accounting for what they're going to be doing with Derrick Henry and the carries that Lamar is going to have.
Right. Yeah. I think it's funny. I saw somebody who had posted something on Twitter with I think it was the 5 receivers. No, it had Andrews included and likely included too. So it included I think the wide receivers and the tight ends that totaled about 4,200 yards. It might not have included like Deontay Hardy or some of the guys on the margin who in aggregate, they pick up a significant number of total yards between them. But it was like 4,200 yards or something for them. And I'm like, if the Ravens are good, they won't approach 4,200 yards of receiving on this team. It's, ideally, you want the Ravens to throw for about 160, 170 yards a game. And that's generally going to mean that they're winning because they're running the ball right down the other team's throat. They can't do anything. They're playing good defense and probably winning by 20 a lot of games.
Yeah, and some fans are, I think, maybe a little sick of hearing about the efficiency. I think some of them really do want that volumetric increase. I'm not really one of those people. I think as long as it's getting the job done, I'm good with it. So I'm pretty much good with them doing whatever they want to do as long as it gets the job done. And I think we'll get a little bit of Tez Walker in the mix here and there, but I do expect, like I said, Andrews likely it's going to be a big factor through the air. Zay Flowers is going to get his, obviously. Aguilar, I'm super impressed by him. I love that press conference the other day. It seems like he's really settling in as the elder statesman of this group, which is funny to think about, but seems like he's up to the task. So it's
just an incredible difference from what I expected when he came in. I'm sure the Ravens knew more, obviously, about who he was, and DeCosta probably talked to teammates of his, coaches of his, to try and get a good angle. But he'd been so bad in those 2 years at New England. It was hard to expect anything. I mean, lots of drops, low yak, low everything. Frankly, it was near the bottom of all the receiver group in a lot of categories, and then he came in. He just had a fantastic year for the Ravens in this first year, and not only a fantastic year in terms of his own rate statistics, but a great year in terms of unselfishness characteristics. Extended play characteristics, things you wouldn't normally expect would be, really good. But the play against the Rams, I mean, he's already kind of etched himself into Ravens history with that. I mean, you and I might talk again about football. Okay, probably not me because I'll be 90 something at the time. I was going to say 30 years from now.
You'll still be. Don't worry.
Maybe I'll be 91 if I'm alive, and I'm sure I'll remember the play if you remind it to me between gulps of applesauce at the time. But anyway, I'll look forward to that conversation when it occurs. But anyway, iconic play, and it's one of the ones from Ravens history that you might tell your grandchildren about if you are Jake's age now in 30 years.
Yeah. And, announcing himself against the Bengals in that week 2 game where he scores the touchdown, those are snaps that you would have expected to go to Beckham, who gets hurt in that game. He steps up big time. Obviously a little bit of a dud in that first Pittsburgh game, but all those receivers did. And yeah, just a model of consistency. And I think it speaks to something, and it's good to have him in a room with Bateman. Because he starts out his career. I think he started out with a volatile kind of Carson Wentz situation in Philly, and he was kind of expected to be this number 1 guy, first round draft pick. Doesn't work out, like you said. He goes to some bum New England teams that post Tom Brady, they really don't know what they're doing, and I don't know. It just speaks to work ethic. I think it speaks to patience and just kind of finding some inner peace within yourself. That's something that Rashad Bateman can really look at and say, hey, look, I got this, little handshake deal here to keep me in Baltimore a couple more years. I got a little bit of money in my pocket. Let me look at what this guy's doing and see if I can use this to kind of get my career back on track.
Yeah, I would love for that. Some people have the capacity for that. Other people are too defensive to take advantage of it. And some other people, honestly, I can't necessarily relate to this, but I can see it in family members and whatnot. If there's depression involved, that you just may not be able to get people past this. I do hope Rashad Bateman can get over whatever mental humps there are, because I think he could still be a fantastic football player for the Ravens if things work out. And I don't even know that 100% of it is his fault, but he's got to treat it as if 100% of it is his fault, even though it may be some Monken's not scheming in him as much as he could. It may be Lamar doesn't trust him as much as he should. But in terms of whose problem it is, first and foremost, it's his problem because he's got to deal with the financial outcome that goes with it.
Yeah, right. And I mean, he could make points about fault or this or that, or my agent wasn't on top of it and didn't tell me to report, and they forego my 5th-year option. You make those arguments till the cows come home, but I don't know. It seems like, listening to some of his media availability, it does seem like he's at a little bit more peace than I think we've seen in the past. And really, maybe it's time to stop thinking about faults. And you know what? Maybe it was my fault, maybe it was not, but you know what? It's my responsibility going forward to get this thing back on track. So, he's in a good environment for that too.
That's the way to say it. That's the way to say it. So let's go with what's a good season for Tez Walker. Now we lose track of who we're talking about as we talk about Aguilar, we talk about Bateman, but for Tez Walker, what's a good season?
Let's see. I write down here, Tez Walker. I think I said somewhere in the range of 25, 35 catches, handful of touchdowns would be good. What I want, and I think we kind of talked about it with Washington a little bit, there's an eye test aspect with him that I think is going to be important. Is his yards per catch going to be high? You talked about the yards after contact. I think, making it look good and making it look, because like I said, the production, I'm not expecting a ton there. I just think there's too many mouths to feed right now. But is he a good deep threat? Not just in the sense of is he catching balls deep, but is he engendering respect from defenses? Is he getting them to maybe back off a little bit in certain situations by the end of the year? I think that would be a good sort of acid test. Speed on tape, is that good? Positive answers to all these questions. I think if we have those at the end of the year, plus give me, a couple hundred receiving yards, 25, 35 catches, handful of touchdowns, I think that will be a good season for him in what's more of a pass-happy NFL these days.
All right, that certainly would be a good season. I think I'll just read it for you. Plays well in the preseason, absolutely critical for him. Again, stay healthy. That includes camp, and carves out a role with approximately 35 targets. I'll say in 2024, does enough as a run blocker to stay on the field. Improves route running to complement his deep threat ability. That's absolutely critical. He's got to get that solved in year one here. It can't be a question going into year two. And his YAC improves to contribute to a yards per target of 7.5 plus. I'm not going to put any limitation or any expectation on touchdowns, but if I'm saying 7.5 at 35 targets, which is the minimum, what I'm saying about 260 yards of receiving is kind of the base end. And if it's 350, fantastic. If it's 230, it could still be okay with fewer targets. And then you need to make sure that he's doing enough as a run blocker to stay on the field.
Yeah, and they talk about, I think it was Greg Lewis at the podium the other day was talking about how he's been a sponge through these first couple practices. He's really kind of trying to figure out what he's doing right, what he's doing wrong. He's, attentive in the meetings. He's speaking up. So that's all speaks very well to what I think will be good preparation. And that's just going to be, take it to Sundays, whatever opportunities you get, don't make too many mistakes. And if you do, try to learn from them. I think, like we keep saying, there's just a lot of targets to go around in this offense already. So I think it's just kind of looking good, passing the eye test. Maybe do you project as a real player in this offense? Maybe not this year, but next year and years down the line, I think that would be a good season for me.
All right, very good. How about a great season?
It's funny. They keep talking about this Torrey Smith thing. I feel like I've heard it more than once. And I went back and looked at Torrey Smith's rookie season 2011. I was pretty surprised. I knew he had a good season, but 841 yards, 7 touchdowns, 16.8 yards per catch for Torrey Smith. I mean, obviously 3 of those touchdowns coming in that Rams game there in St. Louis all those years ago. I mean, if he's in that neighborhood, I don't necessarily need him to have that, but a great season. Let's, putting a number on it, I think maybe might not be the smartest thing, but give me 500 yards, give me 5 touchdowns. Look good as a deep threat. Develop that route tree a little bit more. Like you said, the intermediate routes, the in cuts, the shiftiness with the feet, the use of the hands. I think if it starts to look great in that respect, I think that's a great season. Plus all the numbers that I mentioned.
All right, that's outstanding, and I like to do it that way as you did. Generally, mine's very similar. I say he gets a trial by fire due to circumstance, and ideally, that's his own fine play. It doesn't have anything to do with weakness in other players. But honestly, more likely it's due to injury because that's how most trials by fires come. And he takes advantage of it with a season of 8.5 yards per target. That'd be really good, by the way, in Ravens history. 8.5 yards per target for a rookie has not been done a lot of times on at least 45 targets. So Aguilar 23 is right at that 8.5 and 45. Develops timing and chemistry with Lamar. I think that's absolutely critical as he needs to have that trust, needs to have extended play mojo. Lamar's got to feel that when he throws him a football, it's not at risk of getting intercepted. So that's, I think that's, he's got to believe that specifically that Walker is going to bail him out of an occasional interception if he throws it a little bit off target. Anyway, that's important. Route running forces safety attention. Now, all I want is on a limited scale in 2024. I'm not expecting him to develop 20 highlight plays where he peeled the safety off the top of the defense. But I want to see evidence that that's coming. I want to see evidence that his combination of routes is such that he can come back for the football, and the corner can't give up too much space and closer to the line of scrimmage, or can't just immediately bail too early. And because of that, there's a threat of him taking the lid off, and the safety needs to be very attentive to his position on the field. If we're seeing that, I think it immediately makes more opportunity for other Ravens receivers. Whether or not the safety actually follows through, even just leaving the safety in limbo can be a good thing in terms of not allowing him to immediately jump down on Andrews or jump down on Zay Flowers or whatever he's doing. Very positive things. Obviously, route running, I talked about that. It enters 2025 as part of an entrenched 3-man wide receiver rotation. I would love to see that, and that would certainly be a great season. If there's no doubt about this point in 2025, we're having this 2-player discussion. Well, it's a great three-man rotation they have here, and these guys are all about equal. We want to see all these guys get some targets. It's a lot of mouths to feed, and you got these 2 tight ends. If we're having this discussion next year, that would be a really great season.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's kind of the point that I was making when we were talking about the good is what's the future projection here? Because like I keep harping on, I'm not expecting a ton of opportunities for this year, but if he can just inspire enough confidence to say, you know what, Nelson Aguilar, thank you for your contributions. We don't actually need to extend you because,
All right. Always a pleasure talking football with you, Jake. A great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Can you tell people where they can find your content or talk football with you on Twitter?
Yeah, of course. So I'm at Jake Luke on Twitter. My last name is spelled Louque. Talking football once a week currently on the Exit 52 podcast. You can find us on, pretty much any podcast platform and YouTube. That'll tick back up to 3 times a week during the season and probably get some more content going when training camp officially kicks up. If you're into the Orioles, we're covering them a couple times a week. Right now, we go live after each series on YouTube. And just having a good time here in the summer. Vibes are good with the Orioles, Ravens. Things are quiet, which I like. A couple tumultuous off seasons there. This one's a little quieter. It's not the easiest from the content perspective, but we make it work. And it's nice to have a little respite after all the, like I said, tumult with the Lamar contract and everything. So.
I agree. Less the better, probably for now. The only thing that I'd like to maybe see coming out of the Ravens camp before they open in late July would be maybe some move on Brandon Stevens, or don't even know what else it would be. But I don't want to hear about arrests. I don't want to hear about anybody involved with a gun or a drug or a car and alcohol or any of that. The less we hear, obviously, about that, the better. And hopefully, the Ravens go to camp healthy and avoid those injuries that have been very, very frustrating for a certain number of players on the team. Particularly the corners who haven't been getting on the field, like JAD's missed 5 out of 6 lifetime preseason games, and it's really, I think, held back his development.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made the point there that the less off the field stuff, the better. And I made the point that the contract was tough to get through. Well, that has paled in comparison to some other Ravens off seasons. So yeah. On the sliding scale, it hasn't been too terrible the last couple of years.
Very good. Very good. The folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. Tell me what you'd like to talk about. I'm very open. I have an open mic basis for the show a lot, particularly during this time of year. I'm happy to talk about what you want. Unfortunately, we're out of expectation shows. All 29 of those have been scheduled now, so we don't have any others for that. We have the Recollection series. If you have a Raven from the past you'd like to talk about. And the last 2 that I've recorded are about James Hurst. Really interesting one. Should be up there already, by the way, if you're listening to this. And Kyle Bowler, which is coming soon. And so it doesn't have to be a great Raven. In fact, we're really looking to eliminate the Ring of Honor tier. Tell me that second tier Raven you'd like to talk about and some memories you had with him. Jake, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks as always, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.